Untranslatable Words.
Japanese.
Since the beginning of the pandemic, the rise in attacks on Asian citizens and visitors has revealed a disturbing fact. 42% of Americans can't name one prominent Asian American. This points to a larger issue, a stigma of perpetual foreignness that renders 23 million Americans invisible, not to mention the over 12 million Asian heritage immigrants and visiting workers who contribute to our economy, culture, and tax base. The term for these invisible millions is Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. AAPI is an admittedly imperfect acronym for people who trace their ancestry to more than 20 countries, covering a vast expanse of the world's landmass, from Pakistan to Samoa, and from Mongolia to New Zealand. On the one hand, the term pools our political power in the US, just as terms like Latinx or Black pool the political resources of these highly diverse multinational groups of individuals. On the other hand, like the terms just mentioned, AAPI flattens differences between ethnicities who, in their places of origin, consider themselves no more alike than Greeks and Germans. You probably already know something about Japanese culture. Sushi, manga, anime, and these brand names of cars have become as common in mental associations with Japan as samurai and geisha. But it has also become a journalistic trope to focus on things like this. Weird Japan, or Widget for short. There's actually this name for it. At best, Widget reduces a nation to a wacky groupthink techno world. But at worst, this alienating perspective distorts our understanding of anyone associated with Japan. Not all visibility is good visibility. This is why, for the next few minutes, Kaori and I want to share 3 Japanese phrases with you. Although we can't speak for all Japanese or Japanese Americans, these untranslatable words remain, in general, meaningful to all people of Japanese ancestry. Like many of our UAlbany family, Kaori Otera Chen moved here in 2010 in order to live with her partner. She's a Japanese national, meaning she was born and raised in Japan, and Japanese is her first language.
Like the majority of our UAlbany family, Ineke Murakami grew up in the US. In fact, the Murakamis have been in the US since before 1920, when one of Ineke's grandfathers, an Issei, or first-generation Japanese American, immigrated from Kyushu, the southern part of Japan. English is her first language.
Japanese Americans often behave differently than Japanese nationals because of our unique experiences in this country. Yet, we still share the occasional bit of what social scientists call deep structure, meaning that some of our core values and ways of viewing things are similar.
As you say here, Japanese Americans' experiences are unique and are not the same as immigrants from Japan. It is because they grew up in different countries, but in terms of racism against Japanese Americans, which some of these images depict, this can affect immigrants from Japan similarly because we are not necessarily distinguishable from Asian Americans.
Huki wo yomu is at first of our 3 phrases. It means reading the air. To read the air is to have a feel for the indirect communication our Japanese elders often preferred. So body language, proxemics, that is, how close one sits or stands to someone or something, even silence. These are all social cues that help us to gauge how to act in certain situations and what people may really be thinking or feeling. I never truly appreciated how much I rely on reading the air until the pandemic. Zoom has been such a gift to teaching in the pandemic that it seems somewhat ungenerous to say, but for those of us who read the air to gauge whether to speed up or slow down a lecture, when groups need more time on a task, when one student needs encouragement to speak while another wants a second example of a concept, It's almost as if 80% of the feedback that you rely on is suddenly missing.
I want to mention that there are many people in Japan who cannot read the air. People who cannot read the air may say or do things that are not quite appropriate in a particular situation and at a particular moment. To be a person who can read the air, you have to be very observant and considerate. Kuki means air and yomu means to read. However, kuki o yomu, reading the air, also means to consider other people. In order for us to be able to kuki o yomu, we have to think about others first before ourselves.
Gaman. For many Japanese Americans whose families experienced World War II in the US, gaman means to endure or persevere with dignity. This concept is very different than suffering in silence. Public figures, like Daniel Inouye, the son of sugar plantation laborers, who went on to become the highest-ranking Asian American politician in US history, or Patsy Mink, the first woman of color in the US Congress, or Fred Korematsu, a Medal of Honor winner whose court case began the quest for reparations. These people emerged from the camps ready to fight. They spearheaded efforts to get our country to acknowledge women's rights, disability rights, racial and LGBTQ rights. Today, many Nikkei, or Japanese Americans, are deeply engaged in our current civil rights struggle, advocating for long overdue reparations for people of African heritage, and working to free asylum seekers and others in the detention camps at our southern border. What I learned from my family about gaman is this: if hardship comes, you endure it in a way that doesn't impugn your honor or anyone else's. And when it's over, you have a duty to do whatever you can to prevent it from happening again.
I was very sad when I first learned about Japanese Americans' experiences during the World War II, and I thought that that was very Japanese when I learned how they gaman. Gaman is translated into bearing, endurance, patience, and tolerance in English. All those English words describe what gaman means, but they do not encompass the deepness of cultural meaning of gaman. To me, gaman relates to the Japanese notion of not seeing oneself as an important, 自分を大切にしない. As growing up in Japan, I was always told that I must think about others first. Instead of me, 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 it must be you, you, you. This is something that I struggle with in this country. Sometimes you have to give up what you want in order to fulfill others' needs. And not seeing yourself as important is different from not valuing yourself. Wabi-sabi, beauty in imperfection. Again, it is an untranslatable term. It is actually difficult to translate for me. It is hard to explain what wabi-sabi means. I don't know so much about tea ceremony that deeply relates to the idea of wabi-sabi. To me, wabi-sabi relates to the notion that we are inseparable from the nature. The cracks that are very important for kintsugi, the art of golden repair, occur naturally. We accept and understand them as something normal and treat these normal things as something beautiful. This way of seeing ordinary things relates to the idea of accepting things as they are, which is very important in our culture. Aesthetically, bumps and cracks occur with time, which make things even more beautiful. Maybe this is similar to the Western idea of the patina that beautifies copper alloy metals over time. This idea applies to humans too. We all have bumps, cracks, scars, and wounds, which makes us who we are and deepen our lives. And we all become old and eventually die. In the Western world today, this is not openly discussed in our everyday lives, but this is part of living, which relates to wabi-sabi deeply.
For some Japanese Americans, the wabi-sabi perspective starts in aesthetics but goes beyond. Beauty and imperfection reminds us that tradition isn't the same as stasis. Things fall apart, as Chinua Achebe said in his powerful re-envisioning of a line by William Butler Yeats. Thinking of wabi-sabi, we might say of the current US climate that everything is subject to growth and wear. It isn't shameful to need to upgrade things, and to accept the flaws in a thing doesn't mean that there was never anything good about it. With care and creativity, even broken things can gain a new life. It may be different than the initial maker intended, but that difference may be a thing's evolution. Kaori brought up kintsugi, a Japanese art of repair. Here, American artist Victor Solomon uses kintsugi to renovate a dilapidated basketball court in South LA, quote, filling its cracks and with gold, dusted resin inspired by the historic process. Through kintsugi, Solomon asks us to celebrate basketball as a, quote, universally accessible, class-agnostic, race-indifferent platform that brings people together. Repair, as our Japanese ancestors recognized, can be a lengthy process, one that requires imagination and skill. Perhaps one of these skills will be learning to listen to and learn about each other's untranslatable words. Trying, if only for a few minutes now and again, to understand other perspectives and what they add to our ever-changing country. Thank you.
Thank you.